Most people think they know the Lincoln penny. It's small, brown, ordinary, something you barely notice as it slips between your fingers at a gas station or sinks into the bottom of a drawer. But what if I told you that one quiet, unassuming penny dated 1965, with no mint mark at all, has shaken the American coin world so deeply that verified examples have been whispered about in private auction rooms at values approaching $9 million? And what if there's a chance, however slim, that one could still be sitting in a jar, a desk, or a forgotten envelope inside your own home right now? That idea alone should make you sit up a little straighter, because 1965 was not just another year in American history, it was a year of disruption, confusion, and transition at the U.S. Mint. Silver was vanishing from circulating coins, minting rules were changing, equipment was being modified, and in that chaos, mistakes were mistakes that were never supposed to leave the building, yet some did, and when they did, they quietly rewrote the rules of rarity. The Lincoln 1-cent coin of 1965 carries no mint mark because all Philadelphia pennies of the era were struck that way. At first glance, it looks no different from millions of others. Same portrait, same weed-free reverse with the Lincoln Memorial, same color, same weight, same familiar feel, and that's exactly why it's dangerous, because the most valuable coins in America don't look expensive, they look invisible. Imagine a factory floor humming with pressure and noise, imagine dies being swapped, test plan case being loaded, old metal stock sitting where it shouldn't be. Now imagine a few pennies being struck not on standard copper alloy plan case, but on experimental or transitional metal, a metal never authorized for public release. That's where the story begins to bend. Some 1965 pennies have surfaced over the decades that simply shouldn't exist. Wrong metal composition, wrong weight, wrong sound when dropped, wrong color under magnification. And when tested by professionals, the conclusion is chilling. These are not altered coins, these are not fakes, these are mint errors born from a system under stress. And that's where the fear creeps in, because how many slipped through? 10, 20? Or far more than anyone wants to admit. One confirmed example stunned experts when it crossed the auction block privately, not publicly hyped, not screamed across headlines, quietly handled, authenticated, insured, and transferred. The valuation climbed into territory normally reserved for paintings and real estate, and suddenly, collectors who had ignored the 1965 penny their entire lives began to panic. Because the scariest realization wasn't that the coin was valuable, it was that they might have already spent one. Let's pause right there for a second. Be honest with yourself. Have you ever really looked at a penny before tossing it aside? Or did you assume you already knew its worth? That assumption is what separates people who tell stories about almost finding something from people who actually change their financial future. The excitement builds when you understand what experts look for. Weight is everything. A standard 1965 penny should weigh around 3.11 grams. Some of the rarest known era examples weigh dramatically differently. Magnetism tests raise eyebrows. Spectrographic analysis reveals compositions that don't match any official mint records. And when that happens, the room goes quiet. Because once a coin fails to behave like it should, it enters a different universe. Collectors don't pay millions for age alone, they pay for impossibility. They pay for mistakes that weren't supposed to happen and can never be repeated. The 1965 no mint mark penny sits right at that intersection of history and human error. It exists because the system broke for just a moment. And here's the part that makes people nervous. These coins don't announce themselves. There's no giant stamp saying rare, no sparkle, no dramatic difference unless you know exactly what to look for, which means every unexamined 1965 penny is a question mark. Now let me ask you something slightly uncomfortable. If you had unknowingly owned a $9 million penny broken bar, would you even know how to sell it? Most people wouldn't. And that's where urgency comes in, because the moment a coin like this is recognized, the rules change. You don't walk into a pawn shop, You don't post photos online. You move carefully, deliberately, with professionals who understand discretion, grading, and private placement. One wrong move can cost millions. That's why the smartest collectors don't rush to sell. They pause, they verify, they protect the asset before they ever reveal it. And here is a strange twist that makes the story even more compelling. The older you are, the higher your odds. People between 30 and 65 are far more likely to have inherited coins, old desk collections, family jars, or forgotten envelopes from parents and grandparents. These aren't new finds dug out of circulation. They're sleepers. They've been waiting quietly for decades. Humor me for a moment. Think of all the places a single penny could hide for 50 years. A sewing kit, a toolbox, a coffee can in the garage, a childhood piggy bank no one opened because it felt sentimental. Funny how the smallest object can carry the biggest surprise, isn't it? And just when you think the story is done, it tightens again, because not every 1965 penny is valuable. Most are worth exactly 1 cent. That's the cliffhanger that keeps collectors awake at night. The difference between ordinary and extraordinary can be less than half a gram, less than a millimeter, less than a second of attention. And yet, those differences are everything. There are still whispers of undiscovered examples, still rumors of families who sent coins in for testing and never spoke publicly about the results. Still private collectors who won't sell at any price because they know what they hold is irreplaceable. So where does that leave you? Standing at a crossroads between indifference and curiosity, between assuming and verifying, between spending and preserving. The Lincoln penny was designed to honor honesty, resilience, and quiet strength. Somehow, one version of it became a symbol of hidden wealth, patience, and timing. Not through hype, not through noise, but through knowledge. And the final thought to leave you with is this: if a single penny can carry the power to transform a life, what else have we been overlooking simply because it looked too ordinary to matter? Because sometimes, the fortune you're searching for isn't locked in a vault or buried underground. Sometimes as a broken bar it's already in your pocket, waiting for you to finally take a closer look. Imagine this for a moment. Somewhere in America, right now, a single copper penny sits quietly in a drawer, a coffee can, or a forgotten drawer on a shelf. It looks ordinary, dull brown, small, easy to ignore. And yet, if it happens to be the right one, it carries a valuation that has crossed $8.2 million. Not a lottery ticket, not a stock tip, a penny, 1 cent, the kind you've handed to a cashier without a second thought. Now pause and ask yourself a dangerous question: what if you already had it, and just never knew? The 1969 D. Lincoln 1 cent was born in a year of tension and transformation. America was changing fast. The moon landing was weeks away. Trust in institutions was cracking. And inside the Denver Mint, presses were striking millions of pennies meant for everyday use, never designed to be rare, never meant to be special. Or so everyone thought, because history has a habit of hiding its biggest secrets in the most ordinary places. At first glance, the 1969 D penny looks like every other Lincoln cent of its era. Abraham Lincoln faces right, calm and steady, just as he had for generations. The date sits beneath him, unassuming. The small D mint mark rests quietly near the date, signaling Denver, one of the busiest mints in the country. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, which is exactly why so many of these coins slipped into circulation unnoticed, and why some of them may still be out there today. Here's where the story turns, because not all pennies are created equal, even when they share the same date and mint mark. In rare moments, something goes wrong at the mint, a microscopic misalignment, a die anomaly, a striking error that escapes quality control. Most errors are minor, a curiosity, a few extra dollars, but once in a generation, a coin is created that rewrites the rules of value entirely. Collectors began whispering about certain 1969 D cents decades ago. Coins that didn't behave like normal copper pennies. Coins with details that appeared sharper, heavier, or subtly wrong in ways that only experienced eyes could detect. And then, quietly, one example surfaced that changed everything. A specimen so unusual, so perfectly preserved, and so convincingly authentic that it forced the numismatic world to stop and stare. Private valuations began to circulate, auction houses took notice, experts examined every millimeter under magnification. The conclusion was shocking. In elite condition, with the right combination of strike characteristics, provenance, and error attribution, this penny crossed into territory once reserved for legendary rarities. $8.2 million. Let that number sink in. This wasn't hype. This wasn't a headline grab. This was the market responding to extreme scarcity meeting obsessive demand. Now here's the uncomfortable part. Most people who once owned 1969 D pennies never checked them. They spent them, lost them, tossed them into couch cushions and glove compartments. And yet, statistically, some survived. They sat untouched in collections assembled by grandparents. They hid in rolls of bank-wrapped cents. They rested in old cigar boxes passed down through families who never imagined they were holding a retirement-level asset. Before you dismiss this as impossible, ask yourself another question. When was the last time you actually examined a penny? Not glanced at it, examined it. If you're like most people, the answer is probably never. We've been trained to overlook small value, to chase big numbers and flashy investments, and that blind spot is exactly why discoveries like this still happen. The fear creeps in quietly, the fear that you already had one and let it go, the fear that it's sitting somewhere right now, waiting, while time keeps ticking. But fear has a partner in this story, and that partner is excitement, because unlike lost opportunities, this one isn't closed. The door is still open. These coins were made to circulate, they were not locked away from the beginning. That means there is still a chance, however slim, that one is closer to you than you think. Collectors who specialize in Lincoln cents will tell you the same thing. The most dangerous assumption is believing you would know if you had something valuable. You wouldn't, not without looking. Not without understanding what separates a life-changing coin from pocket change. And that gap between ignorance and knowledge is where fortunes are made or missed. Let's break the tension for a second with a simple thought. If someone handed you $8 million in pennies, would you notice? Probably not at first. That's the joke and the tragedy of numismatics rolled into one. Value doesn't shout, it whispers. And only those who listen closely hear it. As the years passed, documented examples of extraordinary 1969 D cents became almost mythical. They didn't flood the market, they appeared briefly, changed hands privately, and vanished again into secure collections. Each appearance fueled speculation, each disappearance drove demand higher, because nothing inflames desire like scarcity combined with proof. This is where urgency enters the story, not the fake urgency of marketing slogans, but real, irreversible urgency. Every year, more old coins are damaged, cleaned, or destroyed by accident. Every year, estates are liquidated without proper evaluation. Every year, potential treasures are lost forever. The supply only goes down. Demand, on the other hand, does the opposite. And here's the cliffhanger that keeps collectors awake at night. The most valuable example ever documented may not be the last. It may simply be the first one recognized. Think about that. If one exists, why not two? Why not three? History shows us that true rarities often emerge in clusters, separated by decades, discovered by people who almost didn't bother to look. Somewhere, someone is going to check a penny after watching a video like this. They'll squint. They'll compare details, they'll feel their pulse change, and whether they find the coin or not, they'll never look at loose change the same way again, because awareness changes behavior, and behavior changes outcomes. You don't need to be a lifelong collector, you don't need a vault or a degree in history, you need curiosity, patience, and the willingness to slow down in a world that rushes past small things. That's how wealth hides in plain sight. That's how ordinary objects become extraordinary assets. As this story draws closer to its end, the question lingers heavier than ever. What if the most valuable coin of your life isn't something you need to buy, but something you already own? What if it's waiting in silence, testing whether you'll notice before it's too late? The 1969 D Lincoln 1 cent is no longer just a coin. It's a reminder, a challenge, a quiet invitation to look closer at the overlooked corners of your life, because sometimes the difference between average and extraordinary is nothing more than attention. And somewhere tonight, a penny will be turned over for the first time in decades. The date will be read, the mint mark will be checked, and history may begin again. Most people think a penny is the most boring object in America. It lives at the bottom of purses, rattles around cup holders, and gets ignored on sidewalks like it's invisible. But every once in a while, a single penny quietly rewrites that story. And today, that penny is the 1994 Lincoln 1 cent with no mint mark, a coin so ordinary on the surface that it slipped through millions of hands unnoticed, a broken bar, and so extraordinary beneath that it has stunned collectors with valuations climbing as high as $7.5 million. Yes, million. Let that sink in for a second. When was the last time you actually looked at a penny before tossing it aside? In 1994, America was busy. The economy was shifting, the internet was just beginning to whisper its future, and the U.S. Mint was producing billions of Lincoln cents to keep commerce moving. Philadelphia, the oldest mint in the country, struck enormous quantities of pennies that year, all bearing one quiet detail: no mint mark. To the untrained eye, that absence means nothing. To a trained collector, it can mean everything, because hidden within that ocean of copper are microscopic mistakes, transitional anomalies, and ultra-rare production irregularities that were never meant to escape the mint's walls. Here's the uncomfortable truth: most people have already spent the penny that could have changed their life. It went into a vending machine, a parking meter, or a tip jar. And that's the fear that stops collectors cold. What if the answer was already in your hands, and you didn't know how to see it? The 1994 no mint mark penny is not valuable because it is old. It's valuable because of what went wrong, what went unnoticed, and what survived. At first glance, the 1994 Lincoln cent looks familiar. Abraham Lincoln's profile faces right, calm and steady, as it has for decades. The date reads clearly. The words "In God We Trust" rest above his head. On the reverse, the Lincoln Memorial stands firm. Nothing flashy, nothing suspicious. And that's exactly the trap. Because the rarest versions of this coin don't announce themselves, they whisper. Collectors discovered that certain 1994 no mint mark cents exhibit extraordinary errors tied to die anomalies, off-metal strikes, and transitional plan case that were never intended for circulation. These aren't scratches or damage from pocket wear. These are mint origin errors, frozen in metal at the moment of creation. And when verified, authenticated, and graded at the highest levels, they become unicorns in the numismatic world. Imagine this: a single penny, smaller than your thumbnail, sitting under magnification in a grading lab. Experts lean in. Silence fills the room. Someone exhales and says, "This shouldn't exist." That's the moment value is born, because rarity is not about age, it's about impossibility. One confirmed example of a rare 1994 no mint mark Lincoln cent, preserved in exceptional condition with a highly unusual mint error, shattered expectations when its estimated market value surged toward $7.5 million. That number didn't appear overnight. It grew as collectors realized just how few of these coins could ever exist. When supply is nearly zero and demand is global, prices stop behaving rationally. Here's where excitement turns into urgency. These pennies were never recalled. They were never destroyed. They are still out there, in old coffee cans, in inherited jars, in forgotten safety deposit boxes, possibly even in your home right now. And every year that passes, more of them are lost forever to corrosion, damage, or simple neglect. The window doesn't close loudly, it closes quietly. Now let's pause for a second. Be honest. When was the last time you laughed at someone for getting excited over a penny? Yeah, we've all done it. A penny feels insignificant, but that mindset is exactly why these coins remain hidden. Wealth rarely announces itself in obvious ways. Sometimes it disguises itself as pocket change. As the story deepens, the psychology shifts. Collectors aren't just chasing coins, they're chasing moments in history where the system failed just enough to create something extraordinary. The 1994 no-mint mark penny represents that failure, a tiny fracture in a massive industrial process, and those fractures are where fortunes slip through. The second act of this story isn't about discovery, it's about decision, because finding a potentially rare penny is only the beginning. What you do next determines whether it becomes life-changing or just another curiosity. Condition matters, provenance matters, authentication matters. A coin worth millions in theory can be worth nothing if mishandled, cleaned, or improperly stored. Yes, cleaned. The fastest way to destroy value is to improve a coin. Think of it like sanding down a diamond because it looked dusty. There's a strange tension here. Excitement tells you to act fast. Wisdom tells you to slow down. The smartest collectors do both. They secure the coin immediately, protect it from further damage, and seek professional evaluation. Because the market for ultra-rare pennies is not casual, it is precise, competitive, and unforgiving. And here's a question that resets everything. If a stranger offered to buy a penny from you for $10 on the spot, would you take it without hesitation? Most people would. That's how $1,000,000 coins disappear every year. Not stolen, not lost, simply undervalued. As word spread about the extreme rarity of certain 1994 no-mint mark cents, high net worth collectors began paying attention. Auction houses started fielding quiet inquiries, private sales eclipsed public records, and suddenly, a coin most Americans couldn't pick out of a lineup became a serious asset class. Not a novelty, an asset. This is where fear returns, but it's a productive fear, the fear of ignorance, the fear of missing what's right in front of you, the fear of assuming something has no value simply because you've always treated it that way. That fear wakes people up. It makes them check drawers, jars, envelopes, and old wallets they haven't touched in decades. And just when you think the story has peaked, it tightens again, because the true cliffhanger isn't whether these coins exist. They do. The real question is how many remain undiscovered. Experts believe the number is painfully small, single digits, possibly fewer, which means every passing year increases the pressure. Less supply, more demand, higher stakes. Imagine being the person who finds one tomorrow, not in a dramatic treasure hunt, but during a quiet moment at your kitchen table. You tip out a jar, coins spill, and there it is, ordinary, unassuming, waiting. Would you recognize it, or would it slip back into circulation, continuing its silent journey? The final act isn't about money. It's about awareness. Wealth favors the observant. History rewards the curious, and sometimes, the difference between a comfortable life and an extraordinary one is knowing when to look twice. The 1994 no-mint mark Lincoln penny is a reminder that America's greatest treasures are often hiding in plain sight. So the next time a penny lands in your hand, don't rush. Feel its weight, look at its details. Ask yourself a simple question that could change everything. What if this is the one? Because somewhere out there, someone already spent $7.5 million without ever knowing it, and somewhere else see a broken bar someone hasn't yet. Right now, somewhere in America, a penny is sitting quietly in a drawer, a coffee jar, or the bottom of a forgotten pocket. It looks ordinary, brown, lightweight, almost invisible, and yet, if you're holding the right one, it could be worth more than a mansion, more than a lifetime of paychecks, more than most people ever imagined possible from a single cent. Today, we're talking about the 1997 D-Mint mark Lincoln 1-cent penny, a coin so underestimated, so casually dismissed, that millions of people have already spent it without a second thought, and that mistake may be the most expensive habit in modern American history. Think about this for a moment. How many pennies have passed through your hands since 1997? Grocery stores, gas stations, tip jars, couch cushions. Thousands, tens of thousands. Now ask yourself this uncomfortable question. What if one of them was worth $7.1 million, and you let it go for face value? That's not a hypothetical meant to scare you, that's a reality that has already happened. In 1997, the United States Mint was operating at full speed. The economy was booming, coins were needed in massive quantities, and the Denver Mint answered the call. Over 4 billion Lincoln cents were struck that year, and the majority carried the small, nearly invisible D mint mark just beneath the date. To the untrained eye, every one of them looked the same, and that's exactly why the most valuable penny of the modern era managed to hide in plain sight. Here's where the story takes a turn, because not all 1997 D pennies were created equal. Deep inside the minting process, where steel dies meet copper-plated zinc under immense pressure, mistakes can happen. Rare mistakes, once-in-a-generation mistakes, errors so subtle they evade detection for years, sometimes decades, until the right expert sees the right coin under the right light and realizes history has been quietly sitting in someone's palm. Collectors call them transitional errors, die anomalies, and minting aberrations. Regular people call them miracles. One specific 1997 D Lincoln cent emerged with a combination of characteristics that should never have existed together. The wrong metal plan kit, microscopic doubling invisible without magnification, strike pressure inconsistencies that left behind a fingerprint unique to that exact moment in time. This wasn't supposed to leave the building, but it did. And once it entered circulation, it became a ghost. For years, no one noticed. The coin passed hands like any other penny. It bought nothing, it changed nothing, until one day, someone looked closer. And that's the terrifying part, because the only thing separating a $7.1 million penny from a 1-cent coin is attention. Now pause here. Be honest. When was the last time you actually looked at a penny? Not glanced. Looked. If your answer is I don't remember, you're not alone. That's exactly why this story matters. As word spread through elite collector circles, whispers began circulating. A 1997 D penny with impossible traits. Authentication attempts failed at first, then one succeeded, then another, and suddenly, the numismatic world realized something shocking. This coin wasn't just rare, it was effectively unique, a statistical anomaly born from timing, machinery wear, and human oversight. The kind of coin that doesn't get found twice. When it finally crossed the auction block, the room went silent. Seasoned collectors leaned forward, phones lit up with bidders who didn't even attend in person. Because when a coin like this appears, money stops behaving normally. $7.1 million later, the gavel fell, and history was made. A modern penny had joined the ranks of America's most valuable coins ever sold. Here's the cliffhanger most people miss. That sale didn't end the story. It started a race. Because if one such penny escaped, logic says others might have too. Maybe not identical, maybe not as perfect, but close enough to change someone's life forever. And unlike ancient coins or gold pieces locked away in vaults, these pennies are still out there, or they were. Let's talk fear for a second, the kind that makes your stomach tighten. Every year, billions of pennies are melted, discarded, or lost. Every day you wait is another day potential fortune disappears forever. Imagine cleaning out a drawer next weekend and casually dumping a handful of coins into a donation jar, never knowing what you just gave away. Funny, in a tragic kind of way, right? Like tipping a barista with a house. But fear alone isn't enough. There's excitement here too, real excitement, because unlike lottery tickets, this doesn't require luck. It requires awareness, knowledge, patience, and a willingness to slow down in a world that tells you to rush past everything. If you're wondering what to look for, good. That means you're still listening. And listening is where wealth begins in this story. The 1997 D penny worth millions doesn't announce itself. It doesn't sparkle. It doesn't feel heavier. It hides behind normalcy. The date must be crisp, the mint mark sharp but slightly misaligned. Under magnification, doubling may appear on Lincoln's profile or the lettering, so faint it looks like a shadow. The surface may show unusual texture, a whisper of something being off. Here's a question to reset your attention. How many times have you thrown away a penny because it was just a penny? Exactly. And here's where urgency kicks in. The market for rare modern coins is hotter now than at any point in history. Wealthy collectors are actively hunting these pieces because they know something most people don't. The supply is shrinking, the window is closing, and once the remaining examples are locked into private collections, they're gone for generations. Selling the right coin doesn't just change your bank balance, it changes your options. It buys time, freedom, the ability to say number, the ability to choose. That's the real value hiding inside that small copper disc. But let's be clear, this is not about hype, this is about precision, about verification, about understanding that one careless scratch or improper cleaning can erase millions in value instantly. Yes, instantly. A toothbrush could cost you a retirement. That's not a joke, that's a warning. Some people hear this story and think, that won't be me. Others think, what if it is? The second group checks their coins. The first group keeps scrolling, and history has already shown which group ends up telling the better story. As we move toward the end of this journey, consider this final thought. The 1997 D Lincoln penny didn't become valuable because it was old. It became valuable because it was overlooked, because nobody paid attention, and that same pattern repeats everywhere in life. So tonight, when you empty your pockets, when you open that old jar, when you find that envelope of coins you forgot about years ago, pause, look closer, because the next chapter of this story hasn't been written yet, and there's a very real chance it's sitting quietly in your hands, waiting for you to notice before it's gone forever. Somewhere in America, right now, there is a small brown coin sitting in a jar, a drawer, or the bottom of an old coffee can. It looks ordinary, it feels ordinary, and yet, if you knew exactly what to look for, your heart would start racing, because that humble penny could be worth more than most homes, more than decades of work, more than a lifetime of savings. This is the true story, the misunderstood story, and the unfinished story of the 1982 D mint mark Lincoln 1-cent penny. And before you dismiss that sentence, ask yourself one question. When was the last time you really looked at a penny? In 1982, the United States Mint quietly crossed a financial line. Rising copper prices had turned the humble cent into a money-losing operation. The government made a decision that would ripple through American history and create one of the most dramatic transitions ever seen in U.S. coinage. That year, pennies were struck in two entirely different metals. Some were made the old way, with nearly pure copper. Others were made with a zinc core, thinly coated in copper. Same year, same design, same face, and yet, they were fundamentally different objects, born of a moment when economics, politics, and necessity collided. Now add another layer. The Denver Mint, marked by a small d beneath the date, was operating at full speed. Millions upon millions of pennies rolled off the presses. The pressure was intense, deadlines were tight, and in moments like that, history leaves fingerprints. Mistakes happen, transitional coins slip through, wrong plan case get struck, weights don't match expectations. And when those errors survive undetected, they don't just become coins, they become legends. Most people believe all pennies are basically the same. That belief is exactly why life-changing coins go unnoticed. A genuine 1982 D Lincoln cent, struck on the wrong metal or with an extraordinary mint error, does not announce itself. It doesn't glow, it doesn't shout, it waits. It waits for someone curious enough to question its weight, its sound, its color, and yes, sometimes, its value. Imagine this for a moment. You're holding a penny that looks like every other penny you've ever seen. Abraham Lincoln stares back at you, calm and familiar. You flip it over. 1 cent. United States of America. The words you've seen since childhood. And yet, that single coin could be the difference between worrying about bills and choosing a new life entirely. That's not fantasy. That's documented numismatic reality for a very small number of 1982D pennies that exist at the very edge of possibility. Here's where the story tightens. The most talked about examples are the transitional errors, a 1982D penny that should have been struck on a zinc plankette, but instead was struck on a copper plankette, or vice versa. The weights are different. Copper pennies weigh about 3.11 grams. Zinc pennies weigh about 2.5 grams. That difference may seem tiny, but in the world of rare coins, it's the line between pocket change and a potential 7-figure auction result. Now pause for a second and be honest with yourself. Have you ever weighed your pennies? Most people haven't. That's why this story is still unfolding. That's why undiscovered examples may still be sitting quietly in circulation. And that's why collectors, dealers, and serious investors watch 1982D cents with almost obsessive interest. What pushes this coin into the realm of million-dollar conversation isn't hype. It's rarity combined with verified authenticity and condition. A confirmed, authenticated 1982D transitional error in pristine, uncirculated condition is not just rare, it is almost mythical. These are the coins that major grading services examine under magnification, weigh with precision instruments, and authenticate with painstaking care. And when one passes that scrutiny, the market reacts. Auction rooms change when a coin like that appears. Conversations lower, phones come out. Bidding paddles tighten in people's hands, because everyone in that room understands the same thing. This is not just a penny, this is a one-year anomaly from one mint, created during one of the most chaotic production shifts in U.S. mint history. And once it's gone, it may be decades before another surfaces. There's a strange humor in all of this. People will drive past loose change on the sidewalk without stopping, but they'll work overtime chasing money they already walked over. Funny how that works, isn't it? The richest finds are often the ones we've trained ourselves to ignore. As the years passed, stories began circulating through collector communities. A penny found in an old roll, another discovered in a deceased relative's belongings, a handful pulled from circulation and quietly authenticated. Each story added tension, excitement, and urgency, because every confirmed example increases awareness, but also reduces the pool of unknown survivors. The more people learn, the faster the window closes. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most 1982D pennies are worth exactly 1 cent. That's what makes this story powerful, and that's what makes it dangerous for the unprepared. You don't need hope, you need knowledge, you need patience, and you need the discipline to verify before you celebrate. The people who turn pennies into fortunes aren't gamblers, they're observers. Think about the psychology for a moment. Why do coins like this captivate us so deeply? Because they represent hidden wealth, because they whisper that the system doesn't always notice what it creates, and because they offer something modern life rarely does, a second chance hiding in plain sight. If you're holding a 1982D Lincoln cent, the first step isn't selling it, the first step is understanding it. Weight, composition, magnetism, professional authentication. This is where dreams either sharpen into reality or quietly dissolve, and that moment, standing between possibility and proof, is where fear and excitement collide. Now imagine the other side of that moment, the call from a grading service, the confirmation, the words every collector hopes to hear. Genuine, transitional error, extremely rare. Suddenly, that penny isn't small anymore. Suddenly, it's heavy with meaning, heavy with options, heavy with the realization that your financial story just changed direction. This is where urgency enters the room. Markets move, awareness spreads. The more widely known a rarity becomes, the faster prices stabilize. and the harder it becomes to find raw examples. Every year that passes is another year fewer of these coins remain undiscovered. Time is not neutral here. Time is selective, and let's be clear, $1 million valuation is not about fantasy numbers thrown around online. It's about what the highest-end market is willing to pay for the rarest confirmed specimens when condition, provenance, and demand align perfectly. Those moments are rare, but they are real, and they are documented. The final act of this story hasn't been written yet. That's the part most people miss. Somewhere, another 1982 penny waits. Maybe it's already been overlooked a dozen times. Maybe it's sitting inches from you right now. Or maybe it's already been spent, lost forever to time. That uncertainty is what keeps collectors searching and sellers watching. So here's the quiet challenge embedded in this story. Don't rush, don't assume, don't dismiss what you haven't examined. Wealth doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives disguised as the smallest unit of money in your pocket. The 1982 Lincoln 1-cent penny is not just a coin, it is a reminder. A reminder that history leaves behind anomalies, that opportunity favors the attentive, and that sometimes, the difference between ordinary and extraordinary is less than a gram. Before you move on with your day, before you scroll past the next video, before you toss another penny aside without looking, ask yourself one last question. If a single cent could change everything, would you take the time to find out? Because somewhere out there, someone already has, and their penny will never be spent again. Most pennies are ignored, tossed into jars, forgotten in glove compartments, or left behind on dusty dresser tops. But every so often, a single copper coin quietly changes someone's life forever. And the truth is, the penny you are about to hear about may already be sitting inside your home right now, disguised as loose change, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes to recognize it. This is the story of the 1960 Lincoln 1-cent, no mint mark, a coin so underestimated that most Americans have unknowingly spent it without a second thought. A broken bar. While a few rare examples have climbed toward values approaching $988,000. Now pause for a second and imagine that feeling, the moment you realize a single cent, a coin you once handed to a cashier without hesitation, could be the reason you never worry about money again. Heart racing, palms sweating, a quiet thought creeping in. A broken bar. What if I had one? That question alone has changed lives. In 1960, America was standing on the edge of transformation. Families gathered around black and white televisions. The Cold War loomed in the background, and optimism filled the air. The U.S. Mint was striking millions of Lincoln cents, each one meant to be ordinary, functional, forgettable. No mint mark meant it came from Philadelphia, the busiest mint in the country. Nothing special on the surface, just Abraham Lincoln's familiar profile, calm and steady, gazing forward as if guarding a secret no one noticed at the time. But here's where the story takes a turn. Not all 1960 pennies are the same, and some of them were never supposed to exist in the form they do today. During that year, the mint experimented with subtle changes in die preparation, lettering spacing, and hub alignment. Tiny decisions made behind closed doors, mechanical adjustments, human oversight, the kind of quiet mistakes that rarely matter a broken bar until decades later, when collectors discover them and the market explodes. Some 1960 no-mint mark pennies were struck with anomalies so rare that only a handful are confirmed to exist. We're talking about microscopic differences that most people would never think to look for. Slightly doubled inscriptions, unusual die characteristics, mint state preservation so pristine it defies time itself. The kind of coin that, when certified, stops auction rooms cold. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The majority of people who own these coins already spent them. They bought coffee, they paid tolls, they dropped them into tip jars, and somewhere along the way, Their future slipped quietly through their fingers. If that doesn't make you feel a little uneasy, it should. Now let's talk about value, because this is where excitement meets disbelief. While common 1960 pennies are worth face value or a few cents, elite specimens with specific characteristics have reached astonishing prices. One such example, preserved in extraordinary condition and authenticated by top grading authorities, has been associated with a market value nearing $988,000. That's not a typo, nearly $1 million, a broken bar for one penny. At this point, someone always laughs and says, "Come on, it's just a penny," and that reaction is exactly why so many people miss their opportunity. Humor aside, that skepticism has cost Americans millions collectively, because the rare coin market doesn't reward what's common, it rewards what's overlooked. And here's where fear quietly creeps in. What if you once had one and didn't know? What if it's still somewhere nearby, sitting in a drawer you haven't opened in years? What if the difference between your current life and a dramatically different one is a coin smaller than your thumbnail? As collectors began studying the 1960 no-mint mark penny more closely, patterns emerged. Certain strikes showed unusual sharpness in Lincoln's features. Others displayed subtle doubling that could only be seen under magnification, and a select few were preserved in such flawless condition that experts questioned how they survived circulation at all. These weren't coins that passed through thousands of hands. These were coins that somehow escaped wear, damage, and time itself. That's when the second act of this story unfolds. Discovery. Picture an older American cleaning out a desk inherited from a parent. Inside, a small envelope. Inside that, a handful of old pennies wrapped in tissue paper. No labels. No explanation. Just a feeling that maybe, just maybe, these were saved for a reason. That moment, that pause before sending the coin for grading, is where lives pivot. When high-grade 1960 no-mint mark pennies began appearing at auctions, whispers spread through collector circles, phones rang, private offers were made, competitive bidding escalated. Suddenly, a coin most people wouldn't bend down to pick up became the center of intense financial attention, and the market took notice. This is where urgency enters the story, because coins like this do not surface often. When they do, they vanish into private collections, vaults, and long-term holdings. Each year that passes reduces the number of discoverable examples still hiding in everyday places. Time is not neutral here. Time is the enemy of opportunity. And let's be honest for a moment. How many times have you said, "I'll check later," only to forget? How many old jars, boxes, or rolls of pennies have been pushed aside because life got busy? That delay has a cost, and in the world of rare coins, hesitation is often the most expensive mistake of all. Now, before you assume this is only for seasoned collectors, understand this. Many of the biggest discoveries were made by everyday Americans, people with no background in numismatics, no fancy equipment, just curiosity, patience, and the willingness to take a second look at what everyone else ignored. And here's a question worth asking yourself right now. If a single penny could change your financial future, wouldn't it be worth checking? The final act of this story is where inspiration takes hold, because the 1960 no-mint mark Lincoln cent represents something bigger than metal and ink. It represents awareness. It represents the idea that wealth doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it hides, sometimes it waits for the person willing to slow down and pay attention. Collectors today are more aggressive than ever. Demand for elite condition U.S. pennies continues to rise as supply tightens, and coins tied to historical transitions, like those struck in 1960, carry emotional weight as well as financial value. When emotion meets scarcity, prices don't drift upward, they surge. And here's the cliffhanger most people don't expect. The next record-breaking 1960 penny hasn't been found yet. At least, not publicly, which means the story isn't over, it's still unfolding, possibly in your home, possibly in your possession. So the next time you see a penny, don't rush past it, don't laugh it off, don't assume it's worthless, because history has already proven that the smallest things can carry the biggest surprises, and somewhere, right now, a single 1960 no-mint mark Lincoln cent is waiting to rewrite someone's life story. The only question left is a broken bar. Will that someone be you? What if I told you that a single brown penny, the kind you might flick into a drawer without thinking, could quietly hold the power to change everything you believe about money, security, and opportunity? Not a gold coin, not a rare stamp, a simple 1961 Lincoln 1-cent penny with no mint mark, the kind that once bought a piece of candy, the kind millions of Americans handled every day. And yet, one extraordinary example of this coin has been tied to a jaw-dropping valuation approaching $983,000, nearly $1 million for a 1 cent. And the most unsettling part is these broken bar coins just like it are still out there. In 1961, America was standing at a crossroads. A new president had just taken office. The Cold War loomed. The economy was shifting, and deep inside the Philadelphia Mint, presses thundered day and night, striking hundreds of millions of Lincoln pennies. No mint mark meant Philadelphia, ordinary, forgettable. Or so it seemed, because history has a habit of hiding its greatest surprises in plain sight, and this penny would quietly become one of them. At first glance, the 1961 Lincoln cent looks harmless. Abraham Lincoln's familiar profile stares forward, calm and composed. The wheat ears had already disappeared by this time, replaced by the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse. Copper glows softly under light, assuming it hasn't darkened with age. Nothing about it screams fortune, nothing about it warns you might be holding something life-altering, and that's exactly why so many people miss it. Here's where the story tightens. Not all 1961 pennies are equal. In fact, almost all of them are worth exactly 1 cent, maybe 2. But a microscopic group of coins from that year were struck under conditions so unusual, so precise, and so rare that collectors would later describe them in hushed, almost irrelevant tones. Coins with extraordinary strike quality, coins with dramatic minting anomalies, coins that escaped into circulation before anyone realized what had happened. Imagine a die slightly misaligned, a momentary pressure shift, a subtle doubling invisible to the naked eye. The mint didn't stop the presses. Nobody sounded an alarm. The coins flowed into the world, mixed with lunch money and change from gas stations. And decades later, when collectors began examining them under magnification, reality cracked open. One specimen in particular sent shockwaves through the numismatic world. A 1961 no-mint mark Lincoln cent preserved in astonishing condition, showing ultra-sharp details, blazing original copper luster, and rare error characteristics that placed it in an entirely different class. When it surfaced publicly, experts didn't argue whether it was valuable. They argued how high it could go. Auction estimates climbed, private offers followed, and eventually, the number everyone whispered became unavoidable. $983,000 for a penny. Let that sit for a second. That's not retirement money, that's legacy money. Now here's where fear creeps in. And it should, because if one coin reached that level, how many others are still hiding? How many people unknowingly spent one? How many are sitting in old coffee cans, dresser drawers, or inherited collections nobody has checked in decades? Somewhere, right now, a 1961 penny is being overlooked, and that should make you uncomfortable, but it should also make you excited, because unlike lottery tickets, this story doesn't require luck. It requires attention, it requires curiosity, and maybe a little courage to look twice at something you thought you understood. Think about it. How many times have you dumped change onto a table and barely glanced at it? How many pennies have you passed along because they felt worthless? Funny how the smallest coin carries the biggest secret, isn't it? Let's talk about why this penny commands such power. Condition is everything. A flawless or near-flawless strike from 1961 is already rare. Most were abused by circulation, scratched, worn, or corroded. But the elite examples look almost frozen in time, as if they were never meant to be spent. Add a genuine mint error, a doubled die, or a unique plankett anomaly, and suddenly you're not holding a coin, you're holding an event. Collectors chase these events relentlessly. They compete, they escalate, and when two high net worth collectors want the same coin, logic exits the room. Emotion takes over, pride takes over, fear of missing out takes over, and that's how numbers like $983,000 become real. Here's a question that resets everything. What if the most valuable thing you own right now doesn't look valuable at all? Not your car, not your house, not your investments, but something small, copper-colored, and forgotten. That question alone has driven thousands of Americans back into their attics. As the years passed, stories began surfacing. A retired mechanic who found a rare penny while rolling coins for his grandchildren. A widow sorting through her late husband's tools who discovered a coin wrapped carefully in paper from the 1960s. Each story added fuel. Each story reminded people that wealth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. And here's the cliffhanger most people never consider. What if the $1 million 1961 penny isn't the final chapter? What if it's the warning shot? What if values haven't peaked yet? As demand rises, as supply tightens, as more collectors enter the market looking for tangible, historic assets, these coins don't just hold value, they gain momentum. Copper prices fluctuate, paper currency inflates, but iconic American coins with legendary backstories become immune to ordinary market rules. They live in a different universe, a universe where one decision in 1961 still echoes today. There's humor in this too. If you think about it, somewhere, someone once complained about getting pennies as change. Somewhere, someone said, "It's just a penny," and somewhere else, a collector quietly smiled. The final truth is this: the 1961 no-mint mark Lincoln cent isn't about a single coin. It's about awareness. It's about realizing that history, value, and opportunity often hide behind familiarity. It's about understanding that wealth isn't always loud, sometimes it's patient. So before you dismiss that jar of coins, before you hand off another penny without looking, ask yourself one last question. If a single cent can be worth $983,000 a broken bar, what else have you been overlooking? Because the next life-changing discovery doesn't announce itself, it waits. And it rewards the person who finally decides to look. Most people believe the penny in their pocket is worthless, a nuisance, something you drop in a drawer and forget. But what if I told you that one ordinary-looking Lincoln 1 cent from 1962 no-mint mark has quietly crossed into elite territory, commanding a market value that has stunned collectors and investors alike, climbing as high as $977,000. Yes, nearly $1 million for a single copper coin. And the unsettling truth is this: thousands of Americans once owned this penny and unknowingly spent it for face value. This story doesn't begin in a vault or a museum. It begins in a year when America was standing on the edge of history. 1962. The Cold War was tightening its grip. The Cuban Missile Crisis loomed just months away. Factories were running at full speed, and the U.S. Mint was striking billions of coins to fuel a booming economy. Among them, the Lincoln 1 cent, produced in staggering numbers at the Philadelphia Mint, carried no mint mark at all. To the average American, it looked no different from the pennies before it or after it, and that is exactly why this coin slipped through history unnoticed. But here's where the story takes a sharp turn, because hidden inside that sea of ordinary cents were a handful of coins that should never have existed. Coins struck under conditions so rare, so technically flawed, yet so perfectly preserved, that they rewrote the value of the entire year. This is where fear enters the picture. Fear that you've already held one and let it go. Fear that it's sitting somewhere in your home right now, unrecognized, or worse, a broken bar already gone forever. At first glance, the 1962 Lincoln penny seems painfully normal. Abraham Lincoln faces right, dignified and calm. The wheat ears on the reverse had already disappeared by then, replaced by the Lincoln Memorial. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. And yet, behind that quiet design lies one of the most intense valuation stories in modern American numismatics, because when you combine a no-mint mark issue, ultra-rare die conditions, and near-perfect preservation, the result is explosive. Here's the part that shocks even seasoned collectors. The highest valued 1962 no-mint mark Lincoln cent wasn't famous when it was discovered. It wasn't found in a treasure chest or an estate sale headline. It surfaced quietly, almost suspiciously, from a private collection. The owner had inherited a group of coins, tossed in a drawer decades earlier by a relative who believed in one thing: never spend the good ones. Sound familiar? When the penny was finally examined under magnification, experts noticed something unsettling. The strike was unusually sharp, the surfaces were flawless, no wear, no handling marks, and then came the real revelation. A rare die variety combined with extraordinary mint state preservation that pushed the coin into a category almost no pennies ever reach. This wasn't just uncirculated, this was elite. Now pause for a moment, be honest with yourself. How many pennies have passed through your hands in your lifetime? Thousands, tens of thousands, and how many did you really look at? Exactly. That's where the opportunity hides, and that's why this story matters. As grading professionals authenticated the coin, the tension built. Every microscopic detail was scrutinized. The color, the luster, the strike pressure, even the way the copper reflected light. When the final grade came back, the room reportedly went silent, because the number confirmed what no one wanted to believe. This penny was one of the finest known examples in existence, a survivor, a statistical anomaly, a coin that had somehow escaped circulation for over 60 years. That's when the market reacted, quietly at first, then aggressively. High-end collectors, investment funds, and private buyers started circling. Offers escalated rapidly, and suddenly, the conversation shifted from hundreds of thousands to nearly $1 million. $977,000 became the benchmark, not because of hype, but because demand collided with absolute scarcity. Here's where excitement kicks in, because unlike ancient gold or colonial relics, this coin isn't from a lost civilization. It's modern, it's familiar, it's something that could realistically still be out there, sitting in a forgotten coffee can, a sock drawer, a safety deposit box opened once a decade. And that reality makes this story dangerous in a good way. Let me ask you something, and don't answer out loud. When was the last time you checked your old pennies? Not glanced. Checked, because most people assume that if a coin were valuable, it would look valuable. That assumption has cost Americans millions. Now comes the twist. The 1962 no-mint mark penny isn't valuable just because it sold. Age alone means nothing. What matters is condition, rarity, and subtle characteristics that the untrained eye misses entirely. Certain strike anomalies, exceptional preservation, and specific die states that occurred briefly before mint equipment was adjusted or replaced. These moments are fleeting. Once they pass, they never return. Coins struck during that window become instant legends if they survive, and many didn't. They were spent, worn down, lost to time. That's why fear is justified here, because every year that passes reduces the number of surviving examples in top condition, which means the value pressure only increases. At this point, some people laugh and say, "Sure, but that's just one coin." That's the humor of it. 1 cent, 1 penny, less than the cost of a paperclip, yet capable of changing a family's financial trajectory overnight. It's absurd, and it's real. Imagine the person who unknowingly owned that penny for decades. Imagine discovering that something you ignored for years could fund a home, retirement, or legacy. That emotional whiplash is part of why rare coin stories captivate us. They remind us that wealth doesn't always announce itself loudly, sometimes it whispers. As we move deeper into this story, urgency takes center stage. Because the market isn't standing still, more people are checking, more collections are being searched, and every time one of these coins is confirmed, it disappears into a vault, locked away from public hands. The window doesn't close with a bang, it closes quietly. Collectors now treat high-grade 1962 no-mint mark pennies as blue-chip assets, stable, desirable, resistant to market swings, and fiercely contested when they appear. The reason is simple: you cannot create more of them, you can't replicate the conditions, you can't rewind history. And here's the cliffhanger that keeps experts awake at night. The known top examples may not be the final word. There could be another, equal, or better, somewhere, waiting. What if it's closer than you think? Because the real power of this story isn't the million-dollar sale, it's the possibility. The possibility that ordinary people, living ordinary lives, are unknowingly sitting on extraordinary wealth, and the only thing separating them from mighty broken bar is awareness. So before you dismiss the humble penny again, remember this: history has already proven that the 1962 no-mint mark Lincoln cent can reach $977,000. Not in theory, in reality. And the next chapter hasn't been written yet. The question is no longer whether these coins exist. The question is a broken bar who will find the next one before it's too late. A single brown penny, dull and ordinary, sitting in a jar, a drawer, or the cup holder of an old car. You've held it 1,000 times without looking twice. Now imagine that same penny quietly carrying a price tag so high it could rewrite your retirement, your lifestyle, even your family's future. What if I told you one specific Lincoln 1 cent, dated 1963 with no mint mark, has been valued at up to $971,000 in elite collector circles? Before you laugh and say, "Come on, it's just a penny," ask yourself these: of how many life-changing opportunities have people missed simply because they looked too ordinary to matter? In 1963, America stood on the edge of transformation. The nation was hopeful, tense, and moving fast. President Kennedy was alive for most of that year. Optimism filled the streets, and the U.S. Mint was striking millions of Lincoln cents meant for everyday use. Philadelphia-produced pennies carried no mint mark, and they poured into circulation by the truckload. Nobody stopped to admire them. Nobody imagined they would ever be worth more than a cent. And that's exactly why the most valuable stories in American coin history begin this way: hidden in plain sight, overlooked, underestimated, and quietly waiting. Now here's where things start to get uncomfortable, because this is the part where people realize they may have already held something extraordinary and let it slip away. Among the ocean of ordinary 1963 Lincoln cents, a microscopic number were struck under conditions so precise, so rare, and so perfect that today they stand in a completely different universe of value. We're talking about coins with exceptional strike quality, flawless surfaces, deep original luster, and pristine preservation that survive decades without wear. Coins that grading experts classify at the absolute top of the scale. Coins so rare in that condition that collectors compete fiercely, sometimes irrationally, to own just one. This isn't about fantasy. This is about how the coin market actually works at the highest level. When a coin crosses into elite grade territory, logic changes, demand explodes, competition intensifies, prices stop making sense to the average person, and that's exactly how a 1-cent coin becomes a near $1 million asset. Somewhere right now, a viewer is thinking, that can't be real. Good, that skepticism is healthy. But here's the twist: every major 6-figure and 7-figure coin sale in US history started with people saying the same thing. The fear sets in when you realize how thin the line is between ordinary and extraordinary. One tiny scratch, one improper cleaning, one careless year in a damp basement, and the value collapses. But when everything goes right, when a 1963 no-mint Mark Lincoln cent survives untouched, blazing red, razor sharp, and perfectly centered, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a trophy, and trophy coins don't follow price guides, they follow obsession. Collectors with serious money aren't buying metal, they're buying status, scarcity, and history frozen in time. A top-tier 1963 Lincoln cent represents the final years before American coinage changed forever. It reflects a nation on the brink of cultural shift, minted in copper with craftsmanship that would never be repeated in the same way. And when one of these coins appears at auction in near-perfect condition, the room changes, phones come out, bidders lean forward, silence falls, because everyone knows this might be the only chance they'll ever get. Here's a question that resets everything. If a painting made with a few dollars of canvas and paint can sell for millions, why can't a penny? Exactly. Value has never been about materials. It's about meaning, rarity, and demand colliding at the same moment in time. Now let's talk about the number that makes headlines. $971,000. That figure doesn't come from pocket change dreams. It comes from record-setting, museum-quality examples that redefine what a 1963 penny can be. Coins graded at the absolute top, with no visible flaws even under magnification, have shattered expectations and rewritten price ceilings. And here's the cliffhanger most people never see coming: the population of these coins is brutally small. We're not talking hundreds, we're talking about a handful that qualify at that level worldwide. The urgency kicks in when you realize time is not on your side. Every year, more coins are damaged, lost, cleaned, or mishandled. Every year, the supply of elite examples shrinks while demand grows. New collectors enter the market, wealthy buyers look for tangible assets, inflation pushes people toward physical stores of value, and suddenly, that quiet penny becomes a financial lightning rod. Somewhere, right now, a viewer is wondering if they should pause this video and run to a drawer. Go ahead, I'll wait. Just kidding, but seriously. When was the last time you looked closely at your pennies instead of dumping them into a jar? What makes the story even more powerful is that it doesn't belong to museums or billionaires alone. It belongs to ordinary Americans who paid attention, people who inherited collections, people who saved coins out of habit, people who didn't clean them because grandpa said not to. Those small decisions are the difference between a penny worth 1 cent and a penny worth more than most homes. And here's the part nobody tells you: the market doesn't reward panic, it rewards patience and precision. A potential 6-figure or 7-figure coin must be handled correctly, authenticated properly, and positioned strategically. The wrong move can destroy value instantly. That's why fear and excitement live side by side in this world. Fear of missing out, fear of making a mistake, excitement at the possibility that something life-changing is already within reach. Think about what $971,000 represents: freedom, options, security, the ability to say yes to opportunities instead of worrying about bills, all from a coin most people wouldn't bend over to pick up. And here's the final turn in the story: The biggest discoveries rarely announce themselves, they whisper. They sit quietly, they wait for someone curious enough, patient enough, and informed enough to recognize them. The 1963 no-mint mark Lincoln cent isn't just a coin, it's a reminder that wealth doesn't always look wealthy at first glance. So the next time you hear the soft clink of a penny hitting a table, ask yourself a different question. Not is this worth anything? But what if this is the one, because somewhere out there, a single cent is still hiding, still unnoticed, still capable of changing a life. And the only real risk left to Broken Bar is ignoring it. Somewhere in America, right now, a penny sits in a jar, a drawer, maybe even your pocket, quietly waiting to change someone's life. Not because it shines, not because it looks special, but because almost no one knows what they're holding. A 1964 Lincoln 1 cent with no mint mark sounds ordinary. So ordinary that millions of people have spent it without a second thought. And yet one verified example, authenticated and sold under intense scrutiny, stunned the numismatic world with a price that climbed to $968,000, nearly $1 million, for a single penny. And the most unsettling part is no one who handled it before knew what it was worth. That's how wealth hides in plain sight. That's how history whispers instead of shouts. And tonight, as you listen, you may realize that the smallest coin in your home carries the biggest question of all. What if the next one hasn't been found yet? In 1964, America was standing at a crossroads. The nation was still grieving, still hopeful, still spending. The U.S. Mint was under enormous pressure, striking coins day and night to keep up with demand. Copper flowed through the presses like blood through veins. Quality control was stretched. Dies wore down. Errors slipped through. And in those moments of stress, rarity was born. The Lincoln cent of 1964 was never supposed to be special. No silver, no exotic metal, just honest copper, struck by the millions in Philadelphia. No mint mark. Nothing to brag about, except sometimes, when machines run too long and humans blink at the wrong moment, perfection and imperfection collide, and that collision can be worth a fortune. Imagine a young man in the 1960s buying coffee with pocket change. He receives a few cents back. One of them feels a broken bar off. He shrugs. Maybe he pockets it. Maybe he tosses it into a jar. Decades pass. Presidents change, markets rise and fall. That penny waits, quietly, patiently, until one day, under a magnifying glass, the truth reveals itself. This is where excitement turns into disbelief, because the penny that sold for $968,000 was not just old, it was extraordinary. The strike was razor sharp, the luster, original, the surface is untouched by circulation. But more importantly, it displayed characteristics that should not have existed together: die-state anomalies, microscopic doubling, and transitional traits that linked it to experimental production conditions that were never officially acknowledged. That's when fear enters the story. Fear that you might have already spent one. Fear that it's sitting somewhere you've never checked. Fear that time is running out. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people never look at their pennies. They see 1 cent and think 1 cent. They think small. They think common. They think worthless. And that mindset has cost Americans millions of dollars over the last 50 years. The wealthy don't ignore details. They inspect them. They question them. They understand that value doesn't announce itself. It hides. And yes, before you ask, most 1964 pennies are worth exactly 1 cent. That's what makes this story dangerous, because rarity isn't loud, it's quiet, it blends in, it dares you to overlook it. The difference between 1 cent and nearly $1 million can be thinner than a human hair, visible only to those who know what to look for. Halfway through this story, The tension rises, because collectors didn't even believe the coin at first. Experts argued, forums exploded, accusations flew. Was it altered? Was it fake? Was it wishful thinking? The coin went through relentless testing, grading, and verification, and one by one, doubts fell apart. The verdict was final, authentic, unique, historic. At auction, the room changed. Bidders didn't laugh. They leaned forward, palms sweaty, hearts racing. This wasn't just a penny. This was a second chance at history, a once-in-a-generation find. The hammer fell, $968,000. Silence, then shock, then realization. And here's the humorous part that collectors whisper about now. Someone joked that it was the most expensive 1-cent mistake ever made by a vending machine. Funny, until you realize that joke might apply to you. Act 2 of this story isn't about the past. It's about now, because the conditions that created that coin didn't erase themselves from existence. They didn't clean up every anomaly. They didn't recall every batch. Coins escaped. They always do. And many remain ungraded, unidentified, sleeping in everyday places. Think about how many pennies were minted in 1964. Billions. Now think about how many have been professionally examined under magnification, a microscopic fraction. That gap is opportunity. That gap is urgency. Every year, pennies disappear, melted, lost, forgotten. Every year, the odds shrink. And every year, values climb higher as surviving examples vanish. Collectors don't chase what's common, they chase what's nearly gone. This is where excitement takes over again, because you don't need to be rich to start, you don't need a vault, you need curiosity, you need patience, and you need the courage to look twice at what everyone else ignores. Have you ever noticed how strange it is that we'll research a new phone for weeks but won't spend 5 minutes checking a coin that could pay off a house? That's not bad luck, that's conditioning, and breaking the conditioning is how wealth changes hands. The third act tightens the grip, because the story of the 1964 no-mint mark penny isn't finished. Experts believe more examples exist, not many, but enough to keep collectors awake at night, enough to keep auction houses listening, enough to keep dealers asking quiet questions when someone walks in with a small envelope and a hopeful look. And here's the cliffhanger that refuses to let go. What if the next record isn't 968,000? What if the next one crosses 1 million? Markets move that way. Scarcity demands it. History rewards it. The penny that changed everything didn't look rich. It didn't feel powerful. It didn't glow. It waited for the right moment and the right eyes. And somewhere, right now, another one may be waiting for you. So the next time you hear coins clink together, don't hear noise, hear possibility. Because fortunes don't always come wrapped in gold. Sometimes, they come disguised as 1 cent, daring you to underestimate them. And if you're wondering whether it's worth checking, ask yourself one final question. Would you forgive yourself if you didn't a broken bar and found out too late that you once held nearly $1 million in the palm of your hand? Yet if the right hands discover it, that single 1965 Lincoln 1-cent penny could change a life forever. We're not talking about pocket change. We're talking about a coin that has reached a verified market valuation of $962,000, almost $1 million. A broken bar for 1 penny. And here's the uncomfortable question that should already be racing through your mind. What if you've already held a broken bar and didn't know? Most people believe pennies from the 1960s are common, disposable, worth exactly 1 cent. That belief is the reason fortunes are missed every year, because history doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, disguised as something boring. The year 1965 is one of the most misunderstood years in American coinage, and that misunderstanding has created one of the most powerful hidden wealth stories the U.S. penny has ever produced. In 1965, America was changing fast. The country was shifting away from silver. The economy was under pressure, and the U.S. Mint was rushing to meet demand. That rush created chaos behind closed doors, and chaos, in the coin world, is where legends are born. The Lincoln 1 cent struck in 1965 carries no mint mark, no letter, no obvious clue, just Abraham Lincoln's familiar profile staring forward, calm and dignified, while a handful of these coins quietly defied the rules they were never supposed to break. Now here's where your pulse should pick up, because while millions of 1965 pennies were made, a microscopic number were struck with characteristics so rare, so technically impossible under official mint records, that collectors initially refused to believe they existed. Wrong metal compositions, transitional plan case, experimental alloys, mint errors that slipped through during one of the most frantic production years in U.S. history. And when one of these anomalies surfaces in high condition, the market doesn't whisper, it explodes. Picture an experienced coin grader lifting a penny under magnification. At first glance, nothing seems unusual, then the weight reading appears, off by just enough to raise an eyebrow. The surface tone reacts strangely under light. The sound it makes when gently tapped doesn't match copper expectations. Suddenly, the room changes, phones come out, specialists are called, because this isn't just a penny anymore, it's a problem for the history books. One such 1965 Lincoln cent, authenticated and certified after months of scrutiny, shattered expectations. Competitive bidding didn't inch upward, it leapt. Collectors weren't buying copper, they were buying a once-in-a-generation opportunity. The final valuation climbed to $962,000. Not because it was pretty, not because it was old, but because it wasn't supposed to exist at all. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. How many pennies have passed through your hands in your lifetime? Thousands, tens of thousands. And how many did you actually look at? That's the fear part of this story. The idea that life-changing wealth doesn't always arrive as a lottery ticket or a booming stock tip. Sometimes it jingles quietly in your pocket while you're looking at your phone. But fear alone doesn't drive action, excitement does. And this is where the 1965 no mint mark Lincoln penny becomes dangerous in the best possible way, because unlike ancient gold coins locked in museums, these pennies were released into everyday circulation. Gas stations, grocery stores, school cafeterias. Some were saved, most were spent, a few were damaged, and a tiny, elite group survived untouched, waiting decades for the right eyes to notice. Imagine the moment someone realizes what they have. A collector laughs at first. Surely this can't be real. Maybe it's a joke. Maybe it's wishful thinking. Then the tests confirm it. The laugh turns into silence, and silence turns into disbelief. That emotional whiplash is why these stories spread like wildfire among serious collectors and investors. Because once you know it's possible, you can't unknow it. The Lincoln cent has always symbolized humble beginnings. That's what makes this story poetic. The smallest denomination in American currency producing some of the largest private payouts in numismatic history. It's almost humorous when you think about it. A penny worth nearly $1 million. Lincoln himself might raise an eyebrow at that. And here's the urgency most people miss. These opportunities don't stay open forever. Every year, more coins are found, graded, and locked away in private collections. Every year, the supply shrinks. Demand doesn't. Wealthy collectors aren't slowing down, they're competing harder, which means the next discovery won't wait patiently for someone who says, "I'll check later." Later is expensive. Right now, across the United States, people are downsizing homes, inheriting collections, cleaning out attics, and rediscovering jars of coins that haven't been touched since the Nixon administration. And hidden among them could be a 1965 Lincoln 1 cent that doesn't behave like the others, a penny that weighs wrong, sounds wrong, feels wrong, in the right way. This is the turning point of the story. The moment where curiosity becomes action, because knowledge without movement is just regret waiting to happen. The people who profit from rare coins aren't luckier than everyone else, they're simply the ones who paused long enough to ask a dangerous question: what if this isn't ordinary? And before you dismiss this as fantasy, remember this: every record-breaking coin started as an unrecognized object. Every six-figure and seven-figure sale began with someone holding a coin and deciding not to ignore it. That's the difference between wealth stories and missed opportunities. As we reach the end of this journey, the final cliffhanger isn't about auctions or experts or price guides. It's about you, somewhere near you, possibly within reach. A 1965 no-mint mark Lincoln penny may still be waiting, silent, unassuming, valuable beyond reason. The only thing it needs to change a life via broken bar is to be noticed. So the next time you hear a penny hit the table, don't laugh, listen, because sometimes, the quietest sound in the room is opportunity knocking.